Resident Evil 4 Remake is an improvement over the 2005 original in many ways, but the best of the bunch in my opinion is the Ashley section with the Armadura, the Plaga-possessed suits of armour. I didn't want to talk about this section in too much detail in my review of the game, just in case there was anyone who hadn't got to it or finished it. I think it needs to be experienced without knowing exactly what is coming. But I do want to talk about it now in more detail. Not just how it improves the original, but how it employs give and take and other clever techniques to screw with your mind. Ashley's section in the remake lulls you into a false sense of security multiple times, balancing the control you have over the situation so that when it builds tension and finally releases it, it kicks you in the face like Leon kicking a bunch of hostile villagers. It's like if you were hungry and you took a bite out of an apple someone gave you, only to discover that it's mushy, tasteless, and full of angry wasps. Okay, to explain what I mean here, I'll be going through each of Ashley's sections from both versions of Resident Evil 4 and comparing them. Obviously that means spoilers, lots of spoilers. If you haven't played the part of Ashley yet in either of the games, then I'd recommend saving this video to your watch later list. So I guess we should start with the original Ashley in Resident Evil 4 2005. Playing as another character, especially one that has limited abilities or strength, is nothing new in the Resi universe. It's a great opportunity to mix up gameplay. By the time you get to it, you've kind of got used to the game by this point, you're used to the mechanics, you've killed plenty of enemies. Inevitably, some of the initial fear that you may have felt could be ebbing away, even turning into a bit of confidence. Ashley's original run began with a nerve-wracking, bordering on frustrating scene where you have to shoot her out of a trap and then protect her from a bunch of enemies. She cowers on the ground for a bit, runs to a door, cowers on the ground again, and then eventually grabs a key off a dead guy to let herself into the next room.
I got the key! I can get out!
No issue, you had guns and ammo, you've used them a lot already, and unless your aim is questionable like mine, you're going to get through this introduction pretty easily. Now you take control of Ashley properly. You have no weapons and an enemy quickly spots you and gives you a good old shout of
Allí están.
Okay, so the fact that you don't have guns is always going to be unsettling in sections like this. But it's the same basic enemy that you've been dealing with for a while now, and you immediately learn that you can either dodge him by crawling under a table, or fight back by auto-throwing a bunch of blue lanterns. You have to open a few gates using a crank, solve a few button puzzles under no pressure whatsoever, open a few more gates, picking up a few items along the way that help you progress. Let's be honest, none of this is that challenging or scary. The freakiest part of the entire section probably comes when the music starts, after you wander into a dark area. This is classic Resident Evil, warning you that something bad is about to go down. The music coincides with you spotting a suit of armour standing ominously in the darkness. You ignore him for now, tackling a jigsaw puzzle which I found I had just as much chance of solving by mashing buttons randomly on my controller as I did with genuine effort, patience and strategy. Once you've solved it, you use a stone tablet that you picked up about 30 seconds ago to complete the jigsaw and boom, a door opens. You run through it and collect another couple of puzzle items, then with a crash comes the footsteps of a suit of armour, which, sure enough, has come alive. Cool, awesome, a new enemy, nice and menacing. But then you run right past him without any problems, and all that happens next is a series of quick-time events that you could probably still do if you were playing the game with your feet instead of your hands. You use the Salazar family insignia, turn another thing, run down an S-shaped corridor, and that is it. The entire section is done. Okay, I might sound like I hate this section in the original game. I don't, but this is what I mean when I say that it was badly underutilized and kind of pointless. The fact that I've managed to summarize it in its entirety in less than 5 minutes pretty much tells you all that you need to know. So now let's take a look at the setup of this whole redesign sequence in the remake. In particular the introduction of the Armadura and how the sequence constantly builds and releases tension, and you'll see just how much better this has been handled. The first thing is the introduction of the Armadura themselves, and that name is actually becoming a mouthful, so I'm just going to call them Knights from now on. The first time you meet a tougher enemy in any video game, of course you're going to go, shit, okay, what fresh hell is this? The unpredictability is the initial way to scare the player, but it's also kind of the cheapest, losing impact as soon as the player manages to fight it or get away. The feeling of comfort that the player slips into can then be taken advantage of if the developers are clever about how they present those enemies again later on. And I don't just mean throwing more of them at you at once, or giving you stronger variations, relying on the enemy design itself to do the job next time. Those are all easy things for a game to do. The best games think more creatively about how they can rekindle that initial fear and panic when the enemy first showed up. Playing on your expectations can be a good way to do that, and this is something the Resident Evil 4 remake does with the Ashley section right off the bat. Firstly, note how the remake actually introduces you to the knights before you start playing as Ashley. If it was the first time that you had met the knights when you take control of her, it would still be unnerving, sure, because you'd be asking that question I mentioned. What the hell are these things? What am I going to do with no weapons? The unpredictability would have been a decent enough way to handle this. But what is even more effective in my opinion is that you already know what these things are, even if you've never played the original, because the developers have decided to let you discover and fight the knights as Leon first, with all your guns. In fact, the remake even uses dialogue and banter between Leon and Ashley to set them up as something almost trivial, commenting on the armor to start building that false sense of security.
Little old-fashioned for my taste.
Too bad.
Then you get into the big fight sequence with them, and you quickly realise that, yeah, these suits of armour are no joke. The game is showing you how tough they are, but at the same time is actually letting you get used to defending yourself against them. And yet, it's going to be using that against you in a bit. More and more knights keep coming, but you have your guns. You potentially have lots of health and ammo. Ashley even helps you out by throwing blue lanterns from above, giving you a hint about what might be coming, but helping you out and making your job easier.
I don't think they like the lantern fire!
You repel all the knights, move on, and it's job done. When Leon gets imprisoned, Ashley flees into the library, and the payoff from that setup begins to take effect. The game uses its status as a remake to start messing with you straight away. You know that the knights are coming now, whether you've played the original game or not, because you fought them. The game implies it further by giving you the lantern, which looks similar to the ones that you were using in the previous fight. One of the very few jump scares within the entire game is then utilised, making sure that it has maximum impact. Then you see a knight standing there and you think, oh shit, here we go. The game further creates suspense using the environment itself, because as you're walking around, perhaps even counting the knights to see how many you might be dealing with, there are all sorts of figures covered in white sheets, stuffed animals and ornaments, other things that look like it could be another knight standing there. You can't see exactly what it is until you walk right up to it. It's a clever trick. So then you start thinking, okay, when are the knights going to come alive? Surely the game is going to let me face some standard enemies first, like in the original, just to allow me to get my bearings. Well, good luck with that. You go up some stairs, locate a bunch of keys, and then you hear a crash of metal. Not quite footsteps, but definitely something metallic moving around down there. You can't see it yet, you can only hear it. You edge your way back down the stairs, and sure enough, a knight comes marching into the library. Now instead of thinking, what are these things, you're thinking, holy shit, it's these things. The significance of already meeting and fighting the knights comes in, and makes them scary in a completely new way, that wouldn't have been quite the same if this was the first time that you had met them. In a panic, you run away and use the keys on a door, and the solution to this is pretty obvious in hindsight, but because you're panicking with the knights closing in behind you, all the keys suddenly look the same. It's a similar thing when you have the option to unlock a treasure chest using one of the other keys in the set. Okay, so the knights have been set up, and they're awake and coming for you. Now let's talk a little bit more about the lantern. In the remake, this is now a proper tool that you can carry around with you, doubling up as a torch to light your way and the defensive item when shone directly at the knights, which you discover does indeed freeze them in place for a few seconds. Great. You breathe a nervous sigh of relief. The knights are alive, but I can defend myself after all. I can't kill them, but I can stop them for a bit, which is just as well because these things can kill me in one hit. Also, my lantern doesn't disappear with just one use. Okay, we know what we're doing, let's look for the exit. Once again, that false sense of security has started to creep in. This is the second time the game is doing this. Just like letting you shoot the knights and fight back, it's now giving you a little bit of breathing space, letting you find your feet, and start to get a little bit more comfortable again with your surroundings. You start to explore, noticing the blood on the floorboards, which is another visual trick to start building the suspense back up. Obviously you're used to blood and guts by now, it's been flying in bucketfuls since the start of the game. But the blood trail here on the floor is an effective contrast against the otherwise pristine walls and floorboards. Now that you know the knights are awake and coming after you, you're nervous about following the blood trail. Still, you push on, and the game lets you get used to using the lantern to freeze the nights in place while you multitask, solving a basic clock puzzle where the solution is literally waiting for you a short distance away. This is a sign of things to come. The backtracking then follows. You know how to escape the area, but if you don't pay attention, you can easily run in the wrong direction straight into a knight's waiting broadsword. And yes, the knights do follow you through doors, believe me, I checked. You get away and go down a worryingly steep and narrow flight of steps. You jump into an elevator and are greeted with a room full entirely of motionless knights. Ashley echoes your thoughts as a player at this point.
Didn't I just say I was done?
So you start to feel a bit nervous again, looking at all these knights. Your lantern might start to feel about as useful as a piece of cooked spaghetti. And if there was any doubt that these knights will also come alive, as you walk past them you can actually see the plagger in between their butt plates. You notice the pattern on the door at the end of the room and that you're going to have to ring all the bells in order to get out of here. With a deep breath you get started and yeah, carnage ensues. Once you make your escape, you then start to reach the final part of this section. This is where everything is going to culminate in a spectacular finale. There's blue flame around and the knights haven't been able to follow you into this area, so you know it's safe for now. Walking past a golden knight that you can come back and defeat in an optional mission once you take control of Leon again. But as you approach the light puzzle and start to complete it, you realise that you are going to have to sacrifice your lantern in order to get the insignia that you need to escape once and for all. Once again, the game has given you a moment of relief, letting you find your feet only to pull yet another rug out from under them, laughing hysterically at your continued misfortune. The lights go out, you grab the insignia and make a run for it.
Don't go out! Again! I've had enough of this!
Crawling underneath a bunch of knights that form a tunnel and cringing in case one of them jerks suddenly and crushes you or chops your head off. This makes crawling under desks back in the original look cute. Then it's up to the elevator again so that we can hurtle up the steps and oh shit, one is coming down the steps. The game forces you to retreat, stop and rethink your strategy of running around like a headless chicken. You circle carefully around the knight, hop cautiously back up the stairs and into the library again, which is now in pitch darkness. You'd better check your map, because even though this area is small, because you can't see now, if you didn't memorise how to get back to where you need to go, you could easily run in the wrong direction and end up at a dead end like I did, having to turn back and go back through the library again unnecessarily. Once you finally reach the door with the insignia, you unlock it and reunite with Leon to a mixture of relief but also regret that such an invigorating sequence has come to an end.
Ashley, are you alright?
So those are my thoughts on what makes this such an effective addition to the game. The way it toys with your expectations right from the start is excellent, using your prior knowledge of the original game or the previous section fighting the knights against you. With the lantern it offers you a helping hand but then limits its usefulness and eventually removes it entirely. It balances your control and power over the situation. If it gave you too much power, for example with proper weapons and firearms, the section wouldn't be scary because you've done it already. Too little power and it could start to become frustrating. The tasks that you need to complete to escape are also perfectly balanced. Like in the original game, they're not exactly rocket science on their own. Ring the bells, collect the item, freeze the knights in place while you do it, compare the lock with the right key, find a piece of paper, set the clocks at the right time. All sounds simple enough, right? But the give with one hand and taking with the other while deadly enemies are stalking you makes the world of difference. It creates a panic that suddenly makes basic tasks much harder and more stressful to complete, and this would be too much if the puzzles themselves were long-winded and complicated on their own. You know that whole horror movie chase scene thing where some idiot always falls over or drops something when they're just trying to get away from the killer? As hilarious as that can be, it's not always as ridiculous as it might seem. It's exactly the kind of thing that you might actually end up doing in that situation for real if you're in actual danger. This is what sections in games like this replicate, keeping the suspense building by forcing you to multitask whilst you're being chased, focus on solving a problem in order to save yourself from artificial danger. So that's it. I'm not sure there's much more I can add. If you enjoyed this analysis, even if you didn't agree with it, you might also enjoy my What Makes a Good Horror Game video, where I talk about more examples of the things that horror games do well. Don't forget to like and subscribe to the channel, and if you just stopped by because you were curious about what the best bit of the Resident Evil 4 remake is, aquí está.